My name is Oliver Webber. I'm a member of the London Handel Players, and that was the opening of the second Adagio from Corelli's Sonata in F, one of the works featuring in our programmes this season. However, that is not in fact what Corelli wrote. This is. So, what exactly am I doing here? The short answer is, of course, ornamentation. And in this short video today, what I would like to do is explain a little bit about our approach to this fascinating performance tradition, one which was largely lost during the second part of the 19th and the early 20th centuries, only to be resurrected and revived with the onset of the historical performance movement in the latter part of the last century. As you can hear, we're not just talking about trills, turns, mordants and so forth, the sort of thing that of course is an important part of performance practice, but in fact is easily notated with a small symbol in the score. What we're looking at here is a more complete approach to embellishment, which is essentially improvisation of florid runs, occasional chords, other flourishes and so forth over a simple melody and bass line. Now, if we take a look at a score of music by Corelli or Handel or their contemporaries, this is the sonata that I've just been playing, you can see straight away that in comparison with editions of music from the early 19th century, there is very little information for us as performers. No dynamics, there's one tempo indication, the movement title at the beginning, there are no expression marks or phrase marks, and certainly no ornamentation, in Corelli's case not even the simple cadential trills. All of the responsibility and the choices about these matters were left to us, the performer. Now, I've often heard it said that historical performance worries some people because they feel that they have to obey rules or follow guidelines, and it's all about things they're not allowed to do, and this seems restricting and unmusical. It would be, but in fact this is a perfect illustration of why that is not the case, and when we take an 18th century approach to music of the 18th century, we find ourselves really quite liberated in terms of what we can do. How do we know about this? A number of different ways. The principal ways are firstly through treatises, books about music aimed at musicians, which give study material and methods of learning the art of ornamentation. The second is through surviving ornamented versions of sonata movements, or indeed whole sonatas, and that's what I'm going to look at today. The Corelli Opus 5 sonatas are particularly close to our hearts and the London Handel Players because, firstly, Corelli was a very important influence on Handel. They worked together in Rome. They teased each other about their differing musical tastes. Handel used Corelli's forms of sonatas and concerti as models for his own writing. These sonatas were incredibly popular and influential throughout the 18th century, and especially so in England, where Handel was, of course, working for much of his career. And finally, dozens of ornamented versions of movements of these sonatas survive, including some by close colleagues of Handel. One of them, by Etienne Roger, supposedly, according to the publisher, represented the ornaments as Corelli himself played them. Highly likely to be a marketing ploy, as I don't suppose Corelli would have played them the same way more than once. But I'll just give you a flavour of what these sound like. Another interesting version dates from about 10 years later by the Swedish violinist Roman, and you can see already straight away by looking at the manuscript, copy of the manuscript, that it's a rather more elaborate, and I'll just give you a little flavour of that one. and it carries on for the rest of the movement in that vein. Of course, we can enjoy these beautiful versions as they are, and it's wonderful to study them and perform them. But what I'm interested in today is how can we use these to develop our own skills and our own personal approach to this music, which is incomplete without some kind of ornamentation. One technique we can use, which I'd like to introduce today, is to study these surviving versions and observe the kinds of figures used to ornament particular melodic intervals or patterns or particular harmonic sequences. For example, the first bar of this passage contains 2 rising fourths. And naturally, intervals like that abound throughout the sonatas. So it's quite easy to look through these surviving examples and discover many, many different ways in which that interval can be treated. I've got a few of the examples I found here. Or you'd be surprised how many chromatic examples there are. And then you get some which go out with the range of the interval itself, or above, or both. And of course it's quite easy then to combine these in that first part. It's a particularly nice example, 2 similar intervals. And you can then come up with several different versions straight away. So for example, or and I happen to have 24 examples written down here, which means that without much thinking you can figure out that there's 576 possible versions of just the first bar. So you can see how this is a very fruitful potential way of finding a kind of lexicon, a kind of vocabulary of figures that we can use to come up with something personal to ourselves that's rooted in the 18th century. So I'd like to conclude for today by playing another version of how that opening phrase might be ornamented, which could go something like this. I hope you've enjoyed this short introduction to the art of ornamentation. Thank you very much for listening.